In this next round of working with JavaScript and arrays, we're first going to start out by cleaning up our document of some things we don't need. They were in there so that we could learn a little bit about how things work. So I'm going to get rid of some things that we're no longer going to be using, and also items that have been commented out that I'm no longer using, just to shorten up my code a little bit, because we're going to need a lot of space for the items that we will be adding. So remember that I can just click on a line number and it selects that line of code to make it really easy to add or subtract things from what we're doing. And looks like we got some other stuff hanging out over here. Get rid of that. All right, so now I've cleaned up my document a little bit here. And what we want to do is we're going to make an array. And in this array, we're going to have it a map. So the same way we used an array for our backpack, we're going to actually make a 3x3 grid or map that we can navigate through. Because remember, at the beginning I mentioned that our end goal, our end game, is to make an adventure game. And it will be a text-based game, harkening back to one of the first computer games I played, which was a text-based adventure game called Zork. And it is still a fond place in my heart because it really was a magical experience. So the first thing that I want to do is, we can leave the backpack here, that's okay. Now what I want to do is I want to make a map. So I'm going to make my map an array, and I want to populate it. Now, for this, I'm going to populate these items, and I'm shortening what I'm doing there so I can copy and paste it. And I want 9 because I'm going to create a 3x3 grid. So now I can put in my numbers here. Oh, we don't want 3 twice. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now each one of these is going to be a position. So eventually I'm going to flesh these out with some longer text, but I will just start it out. This will be my troll, and then I'm going to have my cave, and then I'm going to have a crystal. There will be a swamp, and we'll see how this makes sense because we're going to start out in the middle of the map each time. So we're going to start out in the middle of the path, which is at location 4, because we'll have row 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, row 2, 3, 4, 5, and row 3 will be 6, 7, and 8. So it's going to make sense eventually as we look at this. So we have our different map locations. Now, one thing that we will want to do with this is we need to actually put some HTML into our document. Now we could use JavaScript to write all of the HTML using create element and doing a bunch of other stuff, but in this case I'm going to just put it in myself, and then we'll put in some CSS to control how it looks. So I'll just have a div, and then this div will be ID of game map, and then inside of that we will have a div, and then these divs, we don't really need to put IDs on them. We're going to be able to access them a little bit differently, and we'll take a look at how that's done. So this will introduce us to a few more concepts of working with HTML and JavaScript, because when we're accessing these elements, instead of putting IDs on each and every thing, what we can instead do is we can access all of the divs inside of the game map, and that will return an HTML collection, and then we will cast that collection as an array so that we are able to then work with marking it and displaying it appropriately. So we'll see how we go about doing all of this and accessing it. We're going to have an input, so we're able to then tell the computer, hey, this is what I want to do. So now that I have my first cell here, so that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's my 9 items. We can go and change these. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, as we do this, this is where when you figure it out, because not only are we going to be able to navigate between these different points on our game map grid, eventually we will have items that we will find on the map when we're going through, and then we can use those items, and if we use them in the right location, it's going to have consequences, and this is how we will be able to effectively win our game. So it really does give us an opportunity to work with elements, to work with arrays, how we access them, and there's a lot of different components that we can be exposed to as we do this, so it's not just a simple matter of, oh, we're just going to have a simple loop, cycle through the array and be done, but we get to think through some logic, and in some ways it's almost like learning about using databases, because these simple arrays that we're creating are kind of like working with a simple database. So these items here, we will be updating the text in our JavaScript descriptions, because that's where we will have more detail, because that is the text that we will pass out to the player so that they get the visual, the mental picture of what is happening inside the game. So it's got to get these in. So unicorn, forest, and then finally spider. And I know these items because I've thought through what I want my game to be, what messages I want to provide, etc. as we're going to move through it. So I have my game map, I have some stuff here. We're going to flesh these out in much greater detail. And now in your map, in your game, you will choose different items, you'll choose different descriptions, different elements to make the gameplay appropriate to you. We can even look at, in the final version, what we're doing now. We're doing some stuff just to kind of show we're navigating through, but in the real version, we probably don't want to reveal the whole map to the player, so it becomes a mystery of when you move, you don't know what's going to be in front of you. But in the beginning, it'd be nice to get that overview, and that's what we're kind of trying to make. So we can look and we can see that doesn't display like a 3x3 grid, but, and this is where CSS is awesome, is we do have the ability to display things as a grid. So I can put in grid, and I'm going to make it small enough so it fits what we're doing here. We'll just use explicit pixels. Then I want grid template columns. Within those columns, I want it to be 1 fractional unit, 1 fractional unit, 1 fractional unit. And I'm going to want to put a margin on things just to push things apart. So actually, no, this margin is too centered on screen. So now if we take a look and see what we have, okay, so we got our grid showing up there on screen, so that's working quite nicely. But to make it even better, what I want to do is go border And then we'll do 1 pixel solid red. So now we'll see it put a pixel around the whole thing. Now that we have marked our game map, what we can do is say game map div. So we can say all divs inside of game map. I want you to have a height of 120 pixels. You notice that's exactly, if our grid is 360 across and we made it 3 columns, that's 120 for each column. We'll make each square 120 pixels tall, and we'll do a padding left, 1 round, and then finally we'll want to put a border around each one of our boxes. And this border will be 1 pixel solid. And then I'll just grab purple and say good enough. Let's see how this looks now. That's looking better. We got red, we got purple. Excellent. And then ultimately what I want to do is I want a gray color. And this gray color that I put in will just simply be background color. And we'll just say gray. Now, I haven't assigned that to anything yet, but what we will do is we will use JavaScript to assign it to the element that is our current active grid square. So we can see it doesn't put it there, anything around it yet, but now you can see where we have this grid. So we're going to start out in the middle here, the grass, and we're going to be able to move north, east, south, and west. And then once I go west, I could go north or south or go back east. We'll have to figure out how to prevent it so we don't keep going east off the map. We don't want to fall off our map. That would just be problematic, so we don't want to do that. So these are all the little JavaScript things that we are going to have to figure out how to do. So that JavaScript for the output paragraph. I'm going to change this P here, and I'll change it to output. We'll change it here as well because it makes more sense to refer to it as this is where we're providing the output, because then we will also have an input that we're working with as our game advances as well. Okay, so we have our map. I'm going to flesh those things out in a little bit. We're not going to worry too much about it yet. You don't need to watch me type long things. We'll just dump it in, and then you can dump in whatever you want your creative messages to be. So my map location should be 4. This is the center of where we are starting on the grassy path, and what I want to do is say here, well, I haven't actually grabbed a hold of the map yet. Forgot I want to do that. And we also don't really need to change the text anymore at the beginning. We'll be changing it later. So I'm just going to get rid of that. We're getting rid of things that are legacy that we're no longer using. So if you get some weird things, you might want to compare, say, okay, where am I outputting? Because I only want to put the actual output information of things at the end of my document. So I'm going to say let gem be equal to document dot query selector, and it will be my game map. Let my map mark, which is where I am currently at, it's going to be game map dot. So notice we don't always have to say document query selector. We can also be a little more specific, so we can say I want my game map. Within that, I want to, oh no, I don't want to use query selector here. What I'm actually trying to do, I was thinking, I read the line above, but I'm going to tell game map to get elements, and this time I want to go by tag name. And what that does is that allows me to grab all div. So it's going to grab all 9 divs that are inside of GameMap. So it tells GameMap to grab all of those divs. And that creates an HTML collection, which is very much like an array, but not identical. So it's a little bit different as we are going to work with it. Now I'm also going to we're just going to stop with the backpack for now because we're not using it and the items. So we're just going to leave that commented out at the moment. But what we can do is let's go output inner HTML. We'll set it equal to map location. Let's see what that does. Save this. You can see it says path. Now I'm going to go and just update that one item to what I want it to be, just so we know it. It says you stand on a well-traveled grassy path. Now if I go here, it says you stand on a well-traveled grassy path. Okay, good. All right, so that's good. And let's go here and say map mark map location dot class name is going to be equal to gray. Now we can see we've marked the one we are on as gray. So that's working pretty sweet. So we're off to a good start. We've been able to create our map. We've been able to store some information and put it into our document. So our backpack will come into play later because it'll probably start empty or maybe with a few items, and then as we go to different points in the map, we can find new items, we can use items, we can drop items, and interact with what happens at those different points. So the next step is going to be to complete out these statements on the map and then add an input and then analyze the input that's provided to start moving around the map.